You're standing behind the bar, the glass is clinking, the regulars are laughing, and you finally feel like an anchor of the neighborhood. But beneath the warm lighting, a clock is ticking, and the business model you've banked on is fundamentally misaligned with reality. We are moving past the industry's manufactured failure myths to expose the thin margins and fixed costs that keep your capital in constant danger. By misunderstanding where the danger truly lies, you are missing the specific math that defines your survival. We have to start by dismantling that manufactured consensus, because the numbers you've been sold about why bars fail are almost always the opening pitch of a sales call. You are told that 73% of bars fail in year one, a figure sourced from a point-of-sale vendor selling the very software meant to fix it. Other vendors claim 60%, while the National Restaurant Association claims 30%, a restaurant figure quietly relabeled for bars. Independent data is far more measured. Research from the University of California, Berkeley shows 17%, and Bureau of Labor Statistics data places first-year failure for new food and accommodation businesses between 9.7 and 21%. The 90% failure stat is nothing but an unsourced television myth. The real, cold reality is that 80% of bars fail within 5 years. Because a bar is not a simple hospitality dream. It is a high-frequency, inventory-heavy retail business, and those die slowly. Today, we map exactly where your capital goes before the first pour. Your capital is under siege by the infrastructure of compliance before you ever pour a drink. You face application fees and annual maintenance costs, with local licenses ranging from $100 to over $14,000, depending on your zip code. Most owners view these as mere paperwork. They are not. They are the first sliver of your runway evaporating. This forces a kill switch on the naive model that you are just buying a fun vibe, because you are actually buying 3 distinct businesses: a retail inventory business, a labor management firm, and a real estate play. Most owners assume they are running a single venue, but you are trying to balance 3 contradictory business models in one room. If you choose the high-volume model, you are betting your entire survival on inventory live velocity. You need every stool filled every night because your margins are razor thin. You are selling speed, not sentiment. Your inventory must turn over constantly, and any bottle that sits on your back bar for more than a few weeks is not a display of status. It is a liability eating your cash flow. If you pivot to the premium craft experience instead, the math shifts entirely. Your margins look healthier on paper, but your capital is locked up in expensive, slow-moving bottles that might sit untouched for months. You are not selling volume anymore. You are selling scarcity and time. The high-volume shop dies from a lack of traffic, while the craft shop dies from a lack of liquidity. Most new owners walk into their lease without knowing which business they are actually building. Or they try to do both and end up doing neither well. You are shackled to a physical location that requires massive investment before you ever serve your first customer. You begin with the lease deposits and the inevitable, crushing build-out. For a modest space, the construction and interior design alone can swing from $51,000 to $300,000, depending on the complexity of your vision. Then comes the hardware. You are purchasing commercial refrigeration and custom layouts that cannot be resold for a fraction of their value. But the most distinct hurdle is the liquor license. While some supply-restricted markets have seen these permits trade for as much as $381,000, that is a local anomaly, not the standard entry cost. Yet, there is a recurring line item that never stops draining your bank account: the ongoing maintenance for your commercial heating, cooling, and refrigeration systems. This is the background hum of your bar's daily life, and it demands constant investment, regardless of how many glasses you clear on a Tuesday night. Every dollar you tie up in these walls, this equipment, and this license is a dollar removed from your operational flexibility. It is capital that is now effectively frozen, turning your dream into a high-friction retail space. You are locking yourself into a debt service obligation that persists every single day of the year. This raises a fundamental question about your survival. When you add up these startup costs, what is the daily cost of just opening the deadbolt? And what happens when the actual market demand falls short of your initial projections? You are looking at a $425,500 average startup cost to open your doors, with a realistic floor of $174,000 for a tiny room and a ceiling that hits $850,000 or more for a prime, large-scale location. When you factor in the debt service on that capital at typical small business interest rates, you have created a daily overhead that begins to accrue before you have even unlocked the front entrance. Your base occupancy cost, rent, interest on your startup loans, basic staffing, and permitting fees is set in stone. Because these costs are fixed, your business lacks the flexibility to scale down when the demand does not arrive. If your revenue falls short of your initial projections, you do not get to turn off the heating bill or pay your liquor license by the hour. You are committed to the full weight of that capital on every single glass you pour. That invisible tax is dead inventory. You see those rows of bottles on your back bar as a sophisticated collection of assets, but your balance sheet sees them as frozen cash. Every dollar sitting in a bottom shelf spirit or a boutique liqueur that moves only once a quarter is a dollar that cannot pay your light bill, your staff, or your insurance. You might chase a 70% margin on a rare, high-end bottle, but that number is a phantom if the bottle turns only twice a year. In stark contrast, a high-volume house beer that empties its keg 12 times a year is vastly more liquid. In this industry, margin is merely a percentage on a spreadsheet, but cash flow is the clock that determines if you stay in business. The craft owner often fails to perceive the danger until the operational cash is completely gone. They are effectively financing their own inventory for the sake of an aesthetic, holding heavy assets on the shelf while paying monthly fixed costs that never pause. And this reveals the true, harsh reality of your daily overhead. You have already committed huge sums to licensing, to the heavy-duty refrigeration, and to the initial build-out, but now you have to look at the granular, per-drink cost structure that defines your actual take-home pay. If your operating costs average $20,000 each month, you need to know exactly how much of every single pour is being siphoned away by the tax of the rent, the cost of the labor, and the friction of the space before it ever reaches your pocket. We have to break down the micromath of a $9 beer, because it is the only way to see what your entry capital has actually committed you to on every single transaction. That first pour is an accounting illusion. When you slide that $9 beer across the wood, you are not pocketing $6. You are managing a violent collision of fixed and variable expenses. Start with your labor. In a standard venue, you should expect to spend between 25 and 35% of your total revenue just on the people, behind the stick, in the kitchen, and washing the glassware. Add the cost of the beer, the tap waste, the inevitable overpours, and the staff meals, and your theoretical margin evaporates before the customer even takes a sip. You are effectively a middleman for a utility company, a landlord, and a labor pool, all while holding a depreciating inventory that spoils or goes stale. The industry often promises a 10 to 15% net profit margin, but that is the aspirational ceiling. If your bar generates $25,000 to $30,000 in monthly revenue, the reality for many independent venues sits closer to 5 to 10%. Every dollar that enters the till is already spoken for by the cold, unyielding mechanics of the building. You are paying for the refrigeration, humming in the back, the insurance covering your liquor liability, the city fees for health permits, and the processing fees that take their cut of every single transaction. When you realize your monthly operating costs might hit $20,000, you must accept that nearly every line item is a fixed obligation. This is where the reliance on alcohol markups becomes a double-edged sword. You lean on the 70 to 80% gross margin of your liquid inventory to cover these burdens, but you are gambling that your velocity remains high enough to keep the engine from stalling. This structural vulnerability is precisely why the failure rates look the way they do by year 4. The business is a machine designed to run at capacity, and it has almost no room to accommodate a change in the weather. That divergence is perfectly illustrated by the collapse of Bar Louie. In January of 2020, just before the pandemic, this national gastrobar chain filed for bankruptcy after shuttering 38 locations. The units they closed had seen same-store sales drop 10.9% for the year. The locations that remained open saw a decline of only 1.4%. Same brand, same menu, same suppliers, same operating playbook. A 9-point difference in traffic was the thin red line between survival and total liquidation. It is a precise margin for error in a high overhead business. The company cited the usual suspects: inconsistent brand experience, increased competition, and falling attendance. But those reasons are just the symptoms. The mechanical reality is that fixed costs do not fall 10% just because your volume does. In many of those shuttered locations, the rent, the insurance, and the debt service did not drop by a single dollar when the customers stopped walking through the door. Assume you open a 2,000 square foot space. You have invested $425,500 to clear the construction and licensing hurdles. On paper, you project monthly revenue of $30,000. In your ideal year, your cost of goods sold sits at 25%, or $7,500. Your labor costs stay at 30%, totaling $9,000. You pay $6,000 for rent and utilities, $2,000 for insurance and permits, and $2,000 for marketing and miscellaneous expenses. After accounting for every invoice, you net $3,500 each month. You are paying your debt and you are building a small cash reserve. Now, introduce the volatility of the industry. You face a major breakdown of the air conditioning system, a repair that costs $5,000. This hits right as a walk-in cooler seal fails, spoiling $2,000 of premium inventory. Simultaneously, you experience a full staff turnover cycle, leading to training costs and a predictable uptick in waste. Then the traffic dip hits. Your revenue drops by 10%, falling to $27,000 for that period. Because your rent, your insurance, your fixed loan payments, and your base utility costs are locked, they do not shrink with your sales. Your monthly profit of $3,500 evaporates instantly. In fact, that month bleeds $5,750 in actual cash. The gap between these two scenarios is $9,250. That is not just the difference between a good month and a bad one. It is the threshold of insolvency. That loss has to be covered by the cash reserves you thought you were building. But those reserves are already tied up in the dead, slow-moving bottles sitting on your back bar. You find yourself holding assets that cannot be turned into liquid cash to pay the immediate, non-negotiable costs of the building. You are profitable when the room is full, and you are failing the moment the volume slides toward the average. Because those fixed costs remain exactly the same whether you serve 50 drinks or 500, you are always one slow month away from the math catching up to you. This is the structural trap that defines the long-term survival of the venue. You are not managing a neighborhood hub. You are the logistics officer of a high-friction retail space where the inventory evaporates. The equipment fails during the peak heat of August, and the bills never once ask how your night went. You are running a machine that only functions at high speed. Yet, You are operating in a market where speed is almost impossible to guarantee for 4 consecutive years. The 80% failure rate within 5 years is a brutal statistic that waits for year 4 to claim the businesses that look successful at the start. This industry is an exercise in extreme, granular management, not social curation. Understanding that distinction is the difference between a long-term asset and a slow-motion depletion of your savings. This video is for education and entertainment. It is not financial, legal, or investment advice.